The house I grew up in always felt smaller when I returned. Maybe it was the years away, first at college, then the cramped apartment in the city, that had recalibrated my sense of space. Or maybe home always shrinks once you've seen enough of the world to compare it against. Either way, as I dragged my duffel bag through the front door that late September evening, the walls seemed to lean in, studying me. "Hello?" I called out, letting the screen door clatter shut behind me. The familiar scent of my father's woodworking oil and my mother's lavender candles hung suspended in the air, undisturbed by my entrance. No answer, just the settling sounds of the old house and the distant hum of cicadas beginning their nightly serenade. I knew my parents were gone for the weekend. Mom had texted me about their impromptu anniversary trip to the coast, but they'd left a key under the ceramic frog by the porch steps, just like they always had, even after I'd moved away. Some habits never change in small towns like ours. What Mom hadn't mentioned was that someone else would be staying here. I noticed the unfamiliar boots by the door first, weathered brown leather, much larger than my father's. Then the jacket hanging on the coat rack, deep navy and worn at the elbows. My heart gave a small, unexpected lurch as recognition dawned. Before I could process why, I heard heavy footsteps from upstairs, followed by a familiar voice. "That you, Ethan?" My throat went inexplicably dry. "Yeah, it's me." The footsteps drew closer, descending the stairs, and then he was there, standing in the hallway, half illuminated by the fading daylight streaming through the windows. Daniel Hayes. My father's best friend since high school. The man who taught me how to cast a fishing line and change a tire. The man I hadn't seen in nearly 3 years. "Your mom said you might be dropping by this weekend." His voice was deeper than I remembered, rougher around the edges. "Didn't expect you so soon, though." I tried to mask my surprise with a smile. "Caught an earlier bus." Daniel nodded, his eyes briefly scanning my face before dropping to my bag. "Need help with that?" "I've got it," I said quickly, too quickly perhaps. He stepped back, giving me space to move past him toward the stairs. As I did, I caught his scent. Sandalwood soap and something earthy, something unmistakably him. A memory flashed, sitting beside him in my father's boat, watching his strong hands work the fishing line while the sun sank into the lake. I was 16 then. I'm 23 now. "Your room's still free," Daniel said, following a few steps behind me. "Your mom said I should take the guest room. Hope that's all right." "Of course," I said, not turning around as I climbed the stairs. "Mi casa es su casa," or, well, my parents' casa. He gave a short laugh. Just a breath, really. I'd almost forgotten that laugh. At the top of the stairs, I paused, finally turning to face him properly. The hallway light illuminated him fully now, and I felt something inside me shift, like furniture being rearranged in a room I thought I knew. Daniel Hayes had aged, not poorly, quite the opposite. The boyish handsomeness I remembered had hardened into something more substantial. His dark hair was now threaded with silver at the temples, and lines had etched themselves around his eyes and mouth. His shoulders seemed broader under his simple gray t-shirt. Or maybe I just hadn't been paying attention before. "Been a while," he said simply. I nodded. 3 years. Longer. 3.5 at least. Your father's 50th birthday was the last time. The fact that he'd counted made something flutter in my chest. "Right, the fishing trip." "You couldn't bait a hook to save your life," he said, a smile ghosting across his face. "I've improved since then." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Have you now?" For some reason, I felt my cheeks warm. "In many ways." Something flickered in his eyes, something I couldn't name, before he cleared his throat. "Well, I'll let you get settled. I was just about to heat up some dinner. Your mom left enough casserole to feed an army." "That sounds good," I said, suddenly aware of how hungry I was after the long bus ride. "I'll come down in a bit." He nodded and turned away, heading back downstairs. I watched him go, trying to understand the strange hollowness that had opened up in his absence. "What are you doing here, Daniel Hayes?" I wanted to ask. But some questions felt too dangerous for homecomings. I didn't learn why Daniel was staying with my parents until later that night, when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen, The overhead lights dimmed to a soft glow, the remains of my mother's casserole growing cold between us. Sarah left, he said quietly, pushing a piece of broccoli around his plate. 3 months ago now. The words hung in the air between us. Sarah, his wife of 15 years. I remembered their wedding, though I'd been too young to be anything but bored by the proceedings. I remembered how she'd always smelled like vanilla and how she'd pinch my cheeks at family barbecues. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. I hadn't heard. He shrugged, a tight movement. No reason you would have. It's not exactly something your dad would bring up in casual conversation. I watched him as he took another bite, chewing slowly, methodically. Daniel had always been deliberate in everything he did. It was something I'd admired about him as a child. How he never seemed to rush, how he gave his full attention to whatever task was before him. Now, that deliberateness looked like a man trying to hold himself together through sheer force of will. Was it sudden? I asked, not sure if I was overstepping. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine across the table. They were the color of steel in the dim light. Not to her, apparently. I nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. Through the window above the sink, crickets chirped in the darkness, providing a soundtrack to our midnight meal. Your dad's been good about it, Daniel continued after a while. Letting me stay here until I figure out the next steps. The house. He trailed off, then tried again. Our house is being sold. Closing next week. And then? He set down his fork, leaning back in his chair. And then I find somewhere else. Start over, I guess. There was something in his voice, not quite bitterness, but close. It made me want to reach across the table, though I wasn't sure what I would do if I did. That's rough, I said inadequately. A corner of his mouth lifted. That's life, kid. Kid. The word shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. A sharp little pain behind my ribs. I wasn't a kid anymore. Hadn't been for years. I had a degree now, a job lined up in Chicago, an apartment with my name on the lease. I'd had relationships, heartbreaks. I'd stayed up all night with friends who were falling apart and held them until the sun came up. But in Daniel Hayes' eyes, I was still just Robert's son. The boy who couldn't bait a hook. I'm sorry, I said again, standing up to clear my plate. For what it's worth, I always thought you deserved better. I didn't look at him as I said it, focusing instead on rinsing my dish in the sink. The water was too hot, turning my hands pink, but I welcomed the distraction. Behind me, I heard his chair scrape against the floor as he stood. Then his presence was close, too close, as he brought his own plate to the sink. Here, he said, his voice low near my ear. Let me. Our fingers brushed as he took the sponge from my hand, and something electric shot up my arm. I stepped back quickly, nearly bumping into the counter. I should get some sleep, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Long day tomorrow. Daniel turned to look at me, water dripping from his hands. Tomorrow? It's Saturday. Yeah, I fumbled for an excuse. I promised Dad I'd fix that loose step on the porch and clean out the gutters. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. I can help with that. The step, at least. Been meaning to take a look at it myself. Sure, I said, already backing toward the doorway. That would be good. Ethan, he called as I reached the threshold. I stopped, my hand gripping the doorframe. Yeah? It's good to see you again. His voice was soft, almost uncertain. You've grown up. Different than I expected. The word settled over me like a warm blanket, both comforting and smothering. I didn't trust myself to respond properly, so I just nodded and fled upstairs to the safety of my childhood bedroom. That night, I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another adult moving through the house, the creak of the guest room door, the running of the shower, the soft padding of feet past my door. It was strange having Daniel here without my parents as a buffer. Strange and something else I wasn't ready to name. It was nearly 3 in the morning when I finally drifted off, dreaming of weathered hands and steel gray eyes that saw more than I wanted them to. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the sound of rain against the windows. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the familiar ceiling of my childhood bedroom. The dinosaur stickers I'd put up when I was 8 were still there, faded now to ghostly outlines. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and an old t-shirt before heading downstairs, running a hand through my sleep-tousled hair. The house was quiet except for the steady drumming of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. Daniel was in the kitchen, his back to me as he stood at the stove. He was already dressed in jeans and a faded flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. For a moment I just watched him, taking in the broad sweep of his shoulders, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other as he worked. "Morning," I said finally, my voice still rough with sleep. He turned, spatula in hand, and something in his expression softened. "Hey, sleep okay?" I shrugged, moving to the coffee pot. "Well enough, you?" "This house has always been too quiet for me," he said, turning back to what I now saw were pancakes. But I managed. I poured myself a cup of coffee, adding a splash of milk. "I guess the porch step will have to wait," I said, nodding toward the rain-streaked window. "Looks that way." He flipped a pancake with practiced ease. "Your dad's got a leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom, though. Thought I might take a look at that instead. Need a hand?" The offer slipped out before I could think better of it. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting mine briefly. "Sure, if you want." I did want, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Breakfast was a quiet affair, the rain providing a soothing backdrop to our sparse conversation. Daniel ate with the same deliberate focus I'd noticed the night before, cutting his pancakes into precise squares before eating them one by one. I found myself watching his hands. They were rough and calloused, workers' hands, but there was something elegant about the way his fingers wrapped around his fork, the way his thumb brushed away a drop of syrup from the corner of his mouth. "What?" he asked, catching me staring. I looked away quickly. "Nothing, just remembering." "Remembering what?" I set down my fork, tracing patterns in the condensation on my water glass. "You used to come over for breakfast sometimes, when I was little. You and Dad would sit right here and talk about fishing trips and work stuff. I used to think you were both so, I don't know, grown up." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "And now?" "Now I know better," I said, returning his smile. "Being an adult is just pretending you know what you're doing, until maybe one day you actually do." Daniel laughed then, a real laugh, not the short breath from yesterday. The sound of it warmed something in my chest. "Wise beyond your years, Ethan Miller," he said, shaking his head. "Not wise? Just observant." His eyes met mine across the table, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between us. A recognition, perhaps, or a question. Then he stood, gathering our empty plates. "Come on then, Mr. Observant. Let's see about that faucet." The downstairs bathroom was small, barely large enough for 2 adult men to maneuver in. Daniel knelt by the sink cabinet, pulling out my father's toolbox, while I leaned against the doorframe, trying to give him space. "Hand me that wrench, would you?" he asked, pointing to a tool on the floor beside him. I crouched down, reaching for it, and our fingers met around the cold metal. Neither of us pulled away immediately. For 3 heartbeats, I counted them. We stayed frozen like that, our hands touching over a wrench in my parents' bathroom, the rain pattering against the small window above the toilet. Then Daniel cleared his throat and took the tool, turning back to the pipes under the sink. "So," he said, his voice slightly muffled as he worked, "your mom tells me you're moving to Chicago next month. Big job at some marketing firm?" "Advertising," I corrected, settling back against the wall. "And it's not that big, entry-level stuff. Still, Chicago, that's something." I watched the play of muscles in his back as he twisted something beneath the sink. "It's just a job." "It's a start," he countered. "A foot in the door." He paused, glancing back at me. "Your father's proud, you know, even if he doesn't say it." The mention of my father made something clench in my stomach. Robert Miller was a good man, a loving father, but emotions had never been his strong suit. Growing up gay in a small Midwestern town with a father who communicated primarily in nods and shoulder claps had been challenging. What about you? I asked suddenly. Daniel stilled. What about Kiku? Are you proud? He turned then, sitting back on his heels to look at me properly. His eyes searched my face, and I held his gaze, though it made my heart race. Yes, he said finally, so quietly I almost missed it. I've always been proud of you, Ethan. Something shifted in the air between us, a current, a charge. I became acutely aware of how close we were in the tiny bathroom, of the way water dripped slowly from the freshly tightened faucet, of how Daniel's eyes had darkened slightly, the moment stretched, taut as a wire. Then the house phone rang, shattering the silence. Daniel blinked and turned away, gathering up the tools. You should get that. Probably your parents checking in. I nodded and escaped into the hallway, grateful for the interruption, yet strangely bereft. It was indeed my mother, her voice tinny through the old landline. Yes, they were having a wonderful time. No, the weather wasn't great there either. Yes, there was enough food in the fridge. No, they wouldn't be back until late Monday. Is Daniel behaving himself? She asked, a smile in her voice. I glanced toward the bathroom, where I could hear Daniel putting away the tools. He's fine. Fixed the leaky faucet just now. That man, she said fondly, always has to keep his hands busy. How are you two getting along? I know it's probably a bit awkward, with just the two of you there. It's fine, Mom, I said, turning away as Daniel emerged from the bathroom. We're adults, she laughed. I know, honey. It's just... Daniel's going through a rough patch. Be gentle with him, okay? I will, I promised, wondering if she could hear the strange catch in my voice. After hanging up, I found Daniel in the garage, sitting on a stool at my father's workbench, staring at nothing in particular. The rain drummed steadily on the roof overhead, creating a cocoon of sound around us. Everything okay at the coast? He asked without looking up. They're having a great time, I said, leaning against the doorframe, though it's raining there too. He nodded, picking up a screwdriver from the bench and turning it over in his hands. The gesture was oddly vulnerable, like a child seeking comfort from a stuffed animal. Does it bother you? I asked suddenly, being here, in their house, while they're off enjoying themselves? Daniel looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Why would it? I shrugged, stepping further into the garage. I don't know. Because your marriage just ended and theirs is still going strong after 30 years? It was a cruel thing to say, and I regretted it immediately. But Daniel just gave a small, sad smile. You really have grown up, haven't you? He said. No more pulling punches. I'm sorry, I said, moving closer to lean against the workbench. That was shitty of me. It was honest, he corrected. And no, it doesn't bother me. I'm happy for them. Your parents have something special. He set down the screwdriver, his fingers trailing along the scarred surface of the bench. What Sarah and I had, it wasn't that. Not for a long time. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Your dad's been my best friend since we were 14, Daniel continued, his voice taking on a distant quality. Did you know that? Freshman year of high school, he punched Jimmy Dawson for making fun of my secondhand clothes. Gave him a bloody nose. Got detention for a week. I smiled, trying to imagine my mild-mannered father as a teenage vigilante. He never told me that story. No, he wouldn't have. Daniel's eyes crinkled at the corners. Your dad doesn't believe in bragging about doing the right thing. There was such fondness in his voice, such history. I felt a pang of something like jealousy, not of the bare friendship exactly, but of the depth of connection they shared. Can I ask you something personal? I said, the words tumbling out before I could reconsider. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. Were you ever happy? With Sarah, I mean. He didn't answer right away, and for a moment I thought I'd gone too far. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yes, he said finally. In the beginning, yes. She was funny, smart, strong in ways I never was. He paused, his gaze turning inward. But people change. Or maybe they just become more of who they really are. And sometimes those people don't fit together anymore. Which was it for you? I asked quietly. Did you change? Or did you just become more yourself? His eyes met mine, and there was something in them, a rawness, a vulnerability that made my breath catch. Both, he said. Neither. I don't know, Ethan. I'm still figuring that out. The use of my name sent a shiver through me. I wasn't sure why it affected me so much to hear him say it. He'd been saying it for years. But something was different now. We were different. Before I could respond, there was a tremendous crack of thunder, and the garage lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. We were plunged into dim gray light filtered through the small windows. Power's out, Daniel said unnecessarily, standing up. Should check the circuit breaker. He moved toward the back of the garage, and I followed without thinking. As we navigated around my father's workbench, our hands brushed in the dimness, just a momentary touch, but it sent electricity up my arm that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. Daniel paused, his profile outlined against the weak light from the window. For a heartbeat, I thought he might say something, acknowledge what had just passed between us. But he just continued on, opening the circuit breaker panel and flipping switches with practiced efficiency. Main's out, he said after a moment. Nothing we can do, but wait. I nodded, though he probably couldn't see it in the dimness. Guess we're stuck with each other for a while longer. There was a pause, and then his voice came, soft and strangely gentle. I can think of worse fates. The power remained out for most of the afternoon. We passed the time in the living room, Daniel reading one of my father's Tom Clancy novels, while I sketched idly in a notebook I'd brought from the city. The rain continued unabated, transforming the world outside into a blur of greens and grays. It was strange, this quiet companionship. In some ways, it reminded me of childhood afternoons when Daniel would come over to watch football with my dad, and I'd sit on the floor nearby, doing homework or playing with action figures. But the energy was different now, charged somehow, like the air before a storm. Occasionally, I'd glance up from my drawing to find Daniel watching me, his expression thoughtful. Each time, he'd quickly return to his book, but the weight of his gaze lingered. What are you drawing? He asked eventually, setting the novel aside. I hesitated, then turned the sketchbook toward him. It was a rough drawing of the view from the window, the rain-soaked yard, the old oak tree with its branches swaying in the wind. Daniel leaned forward to look, his eyes moving carefully over the page. You always were good at that, he said. I remember those cartoon characters you used to make. What were they called? Space Cats, I said, surprised he remembered. God, I was obsessed with those when I was what? 12? 11, he corrected. You gave me one for my birthday that year. I still have it somewhere. The thought of Daniel keeping something I'd drawn and all those years ago made something warm bloom in my chest. You do? He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. You drew me as one of your space cats. Had me wearing a fishing hat and holding a world's best fisherman trophy. I laughed, the memory returning. That's right, I forgot about that. I didn't, he said simply. We fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, softer, filled with shared history and something else I couldn't quite name. As evening approached, the power still out, we moved to the kitchen to scrounge for dinner. Daniel found some candles in a drawer and lit them, placing them around the room. The warm, flickering light transformed the familiar space, casting long shadows and turning Daniel's features into something from a Renaissance painting, all sharp angles and soft curves. Peanut butter and jelly, he offered, holding up the jars. It's that or cold casserole. PB&J is fine, I said, hopping up to sit on the counter beside him as he worked. It was a habit from childhood that my mother always scolded me for. Daniel didn't seem to mind. He made the sandwiches with the same focus he brought to everything, spreading the peanut butter all the way to the edges of the bread, applying an even layer of jelly. I watched his hands move, mesmerized by their strength and certainty. You've grown up into someone your father would never expect, he said suddenly, not looking up from his task. The words hung in the candlelit kitchen, heavy with meaning I wasn't sure I understood. Is that a bad thing? Daniel shook his head, finally meeting my eyes. No, not at all. He handed me a plate with my sandwich. It's just interesting to see who you've become. There was something in his voice, a note of what? Admiration? Curiosity? I couldn't tell, but it made my skin tingle. And who is that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Who have I become, Daniel? He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes tracing over my face as if seeing it for the first time. The candlelight caught in his gray eyes, turning them almost silver. Someone brave, he said finally, someone who knows himself. The word settled over me like a revelation. Because he was right, I did know myself now, in ways I hadn't when I'd last seen him. I knew what I wanted, what I needed, who I was. What I didn't know was whether Daniel Hayes saw me the same way I was beginning to see him. We ate our simple dinner in silence, the storm continuing to rage outside. When we finished, Daniel collected our plates and moved to the sink, his shoulder brushing mine as he passed. The contact was brief but deliberate, too deliberate to be accidental. I held my breath, waiting for him to say something, to acknowledge what was building between us. But he just washed the plates in silence, his back to me, the candlelight playing across his broad shoulders. Later, as we prepared to head upstairs to our separate rooms, Daniel paused at the bottom of the stairs, one hand on the banister. In the dim light of the flashlight I held, his face was half in shadow. Ethan, he said, my name soft on his lips. I just want you to know, I'm glad you're here, that we've had this time. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He reached out then, his hand landing warm and heavy on my shoulder. It lingered there a second longer than necessary, his thumb brushing lightly against my collarbone through my shirt. Then he was gone, climbing the stairs ahead of me, leaving me standing in the darkness with my heart hammering against my ribs and the ghost of his touch burning on my skin. The pour came back on sometime in the night. I woke to the sound of my bedside lamp clicking on. I'd left the switch turned when the outage began. For a moment, I just lay there, blinking in the sudden brightness, trying to orient myself. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I glanced at my phone. 3:17 a.m. Sleep felt impossible now. My mind was too full of Daniel, his voice, his hands, the weight of his gaze. I got up, intending to get a glass of water from the bathroom, and opened my door to find Daniel standing in the hallway, his hand raised as if about to knock. We both froze, startled by the unexpected encounter. He was wearing only a pair of sweatpants, his chest bare in the dim hallway light. I'd seen him shirtless before, at the lake, at backyard barbecues, but never this close, never in the intimate darkness of a sleeping house. Sorry, he whispered, lowering his hand. I saw your light come on. Wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm fine, I whispered back. Just couldn't sleep. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. Me neither. We stood there, suspended in the moonlit hallway, neither moving away nor stepping closer. The air between us felt charged, alive with possibility. Daniel's gaze dropped briefly to my lips, then back to my eyes. Something shifted in his expression, a decision made, or perhaps a battle lost. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and touched my hand. Just a brush of his fingers against mine, but it sent sparks racing up my arm. We shouldn't be alone like this, he whispered, his voice rough with something I hadn't heard before. But he didn't let go, and I didn't pull away. Time seemed to suspend itself in that dim hallway, the only sound our matched breathing, the only movement the slight tremor in Daniel's fingers against mine. Daniel, I whispered, my voice so low I barely recognized it. His eyes were storm dark, his expression caught between longing and restraint. For one breathless moment, I thought he might step closer, that the tentative touch of our hands might become something more. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain he must hear it. But then, like a spell breaking, he pulled away. His hand returned to his side, fingers curling into a loose fist as if to preserve the feeling of our touch. We should get some sleep, he said, his voice rough. Long day tomorrow. Before I could respond, he turned and retreated to the guest room, closing the door with a decisive click that echoed in the silent house. I stood frozen, my hand still tingling where he'd touched it, wondering if I'd imagined the whole encounter. But the heat in my cheeks and the rapid beat of my pulse told me it had been real, whatever it was. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay awake for hours, replaying those few seconds over and over. The weight of Daniel's gaze, the warmth of his fingers, the words that seemed to mean both nothing and everything. We shouldn't be alone like this. When my alarm finally chimed at 7, I'd managed perhaps 2 hours of fitful sleep. My dreams had been filled with fragments. Daniel's hands, his voice, the silver in his hair catching the hallway light. I dressed slowly, dreading and anticipating the moment I'd see him again. Would he acknowledge what had happened? Would he pretend nothing had changed? Would he even still be here? The last question sent an unexpected spike of panic through me. I hurried downstairs, nearly tripping in my haste, only to pull up short at the kitchen entrance. Daniel stood at the counter, his back to me, measuring coffee grounds into my father's ancient percolator. He was fully dressed in jeans and a dark green Henley that stretched across his shoulders. His hair was damp, curling slightly at the nape of his neck where it was still wet from the shower. He must have heard my footsteps, but he didn't turn. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Coffee'll be ready in a few." "Thanks," I managed, moving toward the refrigerator to give myself something to do, somewhere to look besides him. The kitchen felt impossibly small suddenly, the air between us thick with unspoken words. I busied myself with pouring a glass of orange juice, aware of every movement Daniel made, every breath he took. When the coffee finished brewing, he filled 2 mugs, adding a splash of cream to mine without asking. He remembered how I took it. The realization made something twist in my chest. "Here," he said, sliding the mug toward me across the counter. Our fingertips brushed as I took it, and we both pretended not to notice the way we each flinched at the contact. "Sleep okay?" he asked, lifting his own mug to his lips, his eyes fixed on some point above my left shoulder. "Fine," I lied. "You?" "Fine," he echoed, and I knew he was lying too. We sipped our coffee in silence, a careful 3 feet of space between us. Daniel leaned against the counter, I against the refrigerator, like boxers in opposite corners, resting between rounds. "Your parents are back tomorrow," he said finally, still not meeting my eyes. "Monday," I corrected. "Late Monday." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the steam rising from his coffee. "Right." The silence stretched again, filled with the weight of everything we weren't saying. Through this window, I could see the sun had returned after yesterday's storms, painting the backyard in bright morning light. Birds flitted between the branches of the oak tree, oblivious to the tension inside. "About last night," I began, my heart pounding. "The power's back on," Daniel cut in quickly. "Your father texted. Asked if we could check the sump pump in the basement. Sometimes it trips when the power surges." His message was clear. "Not now, maybe not ever." I swallowed hard, nodding. "Sure, I can do that." "I'll come with you," he said, and finally, his eyes met mine. What I saw there made my breath catch. Beneath the careful neutrality, something smoldered, something he was trying desperately to bank. I recognized it because I felt it too. This bewildering, inconvenient hunger. He looked away first, setting down his mug with a decisive click. "Let's get it over with." I followed him to the basement door, watching the set of his shoulders, the deliberate distance he maintained. As he descended the stairs ahead of me, I wondered if this was how the next 2 days would be. Careful avoidance, deliberate neutrality, both of us orbiting each other without acknowledging the gravity pulling us together. The thought was unbearable. The sump pump was fine. Of course it was. But we spent a good 20 minutes checking it anyway. Daniel explaining how it worked, me pretending to listen while really watching his hands, remembering how they felt against mine. After the basement, we moved to the garage to check for leaks from yesterday's storm. The space felt different in daylight, less intimate, more mundane. But the workbench where we'd sat during the power outage remained, and my eyes kept drifting to it, remembering. Daniel noticed. "You should eat something," he said abruptly, You barely touched your coffee. I looked at him, surprised by the concern in his voice. I'm not hungry. You should eat anyway. He wiped his hands on his jeans, turning toward the door. I'll make some eggs. Daniel, I said, his name slipping out before I could stop it. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn. We can't just... I started, then faltered, unsure what I was even asking for. Are we not going to talk about it? About what? His voice was carefully flat. You know what? He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. When he finally turned to face me, his expression was guarded. Ethan, there's nothing to talk about. Nothing, I repeated, taking a step toward him. You touch my hand in the middle of the night, say we shouldn't be alone together, and then you just... I shouldn't have done that, he cut in, his jaw tightening. It was inappropriate. I was tired, not thinking clearly. Each word fell like a stone, heavy and cold. I took another step closer, anger rising beneath my hurt. Look me in the eyes and say that. His gaze snapped to mine, defiant. But as soon as our eyes met, something in his face changed, softened, wavered. I can't do this, he said quietly. Not with you, it's not. Say it's not what you want, I challenged, my heart pounding. Tell me you don't feel it too. For a long moment, he just looked at me, something like desperation in his eyes. Then, with a barely audible curse, he closed the distance between us in 2 quick strides. His hands came up to frame my face, rough and warm against my skin. I've tried to be good, he said, his voice breaking slightly. For your father, for you. But something about you pulls me in, Ethan. It always has. My breath caught at the confession. Daniel, no, let me finish. His thumbs brushed lightly over my cheekbones, a touch so gentle it made me ache. I fought this for years. Told myself it was wrong, that I was seeing things that weren't there. And maybe I was. But then I come back, and you're not a kid anymore. And the way you look at me... He trailed off, his eyes searching mine. How do I look at you? I whispered. A sad smile touched his lips. Like you see me. The real me. Not just your dad's friend or Sarah's husband or any of the other boxes I've tried to fit myself into. My hands found his wrists, holding him there, feeling his pulse race beneath my fingertips. I do see you, I said. I always have. Something shifted in his expression, hope, maybe, or surrender. He leaned forward, his forehead touching mine, our breaths mingling in the space between us. I don't know what this is, I admitted, echoing his words from earlier. But I know it doesn't feel wrong. For a heartbeat, I thought he might kiss me. His eyes dropped to my mouth, his fingers tensing slightly against my skin. But then he pulled away, putting distance between us again. It should, he said roughly. Feel wrong. You're half my age, Ethan. You're Robert's son. I'm also my own person, I countered. And I'm not a child. I know what I want. He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes dark with emotion. Do you? Because I don't. I don't know what the hell I'm doing or feeling or wanting anymore. Before I could respond, the sound of a car door slamming outside made us both freeze. Daniel stepped back quickly, running a hand through his hair. Your parents, he started, panic flashing across his face. No, I said, moving to the small garage window. It's Mrs. Kendrick from next door, probably checking on the house after the storm. We both exhaled, the tension in the room easing slightly. But something had broken between us, a wall breached, a truth acknowledged. There was no going back to casual avoidance now. I should talk to her, Daniel said, nodding toward the door. Your dad would want us to be neighborly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As he passed me on his way to the door, his hand brushed mine, a brief, deliberate touch that sent electricity up my arm. We're not done with this conversation, he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. Then he was gone, the garage door closing behind him with a soft click. I stood alone among my father's tools, touching my own face where Daniel's hands had been, wondering how something so unexpected could feel so inevitable. Mrs. Kendrick stayed for nearly an hour, settling at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, regaling Daniel with stories of the storm's damage around the neighborhood. I joined them after collecting myself in the garage, sliding into the chair across from her with what I hoped was a casual smile. If she noticed the tension between Daniel and me, she didn't show it. But I felt it thrumming beneath every glance, every careful movement as we navigated the space around each other. When she finally left, promising to bring over some of her famous lemon bars later, the house seemed to exhale with us. Daniel and I stood in the kitchen, the weight of our unfinished conversation hanging between us. I should start on those gutters, I said, desperate for something to do, somewhere to put my energy. Before it rains again. Daniel nodded, collecting Mrs. Kendrick's teacup. I'll help. The simple domestic scene, Daniel washing dishes in my parents' kitchen, me gathering tools from the garage, felt surreal after the intensity of our earlier exchange. But maybe that was how it had to be. Moments of raw honesty, followed by the mundane routines of daily life, giving us space to breathe, to process. Working side by side on the gutters brought a temporary truce. We focused on the task, passing tools, making small talk about the weather, the neighbors, anything but what had happened between us. But I felt Daniel's eyes on me when he thought I wasn't looking, and more than once, I caught myself staring at the flex of his forearms as he worked. By late afternoon, we'd cleared all the gutters and were both sweaty and dirt-streaked. Daniel suggested we clean up before dinner, and I nodded, grateful for the chance to collect my thoughts. In the shower, with hot water pounding against my shoulders, I tried to make sense of the day. Daniel's confession echoed in my mind. I've tried to be good. But something about you pulls me in. The memory of his hands on my face, his forehead against mine, made heat pool low in my stomach. I'd had crushes before, relationships even, but nothing had ever felt like this. This pull, this certainty. I'd always thought of Daniel as a fixed point in my life, unchanging and unchangeable. Now, suddenly, he was in flux, and I with him. When I came downstairs, freshly showered and changed, I found Daniel in the living room, staring out the front window. The setting sun bathed him in golden light, highlighting the silver in his hair, the strong line of his jaw. My father called, I said, making him turn. They're having dinner with some friends at the coast. Won't be back until tomorrow night. Daniel nodded, something flickering in his eyes. Did you tell him about the power outage? Yes, and the gutters. He says thanks. A small smile touched Daniel's lips. Always the dutiful son. The words stung slightly, reminding me of the complications between us. Not always, I said, moving further into the room. Not anymore. Daniel's smile faded, replaced by something more serious. Ethan, I ordered pizza. I cut in, not ready for another intense conversation. Hope that's okay. He seemed to understand my need for a pause, nodding as he moved toward the couch. Pizza's good. We ate in the living room, some crime drama playing quietly on the TV. The normalcy of it was almost comical after everything that had passed between us. But as the evening wore on, the distance I'd tried to maintain collapsed. We ended up on the same couch, closer than necessary, our knees occasionally brushing as we reached for more pizza or changed positions. Each accidental touch sent a jolt through me, and I could tell by the way Daniel tensed that he felt it too. The air between us grew charged again, like the pressure before a storm. When the pizza was gone and the show had ended, we sat in silence, neither wanting to be the first to move, to break whatever spell had settled over us. I should call it a night, Daniel said finally, his voice low in the dimly lit room. I nodded, disappointment a dull ache in my chest. Yeah, me too. But neither of us moved. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, counting out the seconds of our shared hesitation. Ethan, Daniel said suddenly, turning to face me. What are we doing? The simple question hung between us, heavy with meaning. I could have pretended not to understand, could have made a joke about watching TV or eating pizza, but I was tired of pretending. I don't know, I answered honestly. I just know I don't want to stop. His eyes searched mine, and I saw the conflict there, desire warring with duty, with the weight of his friendship with my father, with the years between us. When I look at you now, he said slowly, I see the boy you were, but also the man you've become. And it's confusing. Don't look at who I was, I said, leaning slightly closer. Look at who I am. Something shifted in his expression. A surrender, perhaps. His hand moved across the space between us, hesitating for a moment before settling on my knee. The weight of it, the warmth, sent my pulse racing. This could ruin everything, he said quietly. Your father's friendship, your family's trust in me. Or it could be something real, I countered, something honest. His fingers tightened slightly on my knee. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, I admitted, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. The moment stretched between us, taut with possibility. Then, slowly, deliberately, Daniel stood, his hand slipping from my knee. I need some air, he said. Coming? I nodded, following him to the back porch. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black velvet. We stood side by side at the railing, shoulders not quite touching, looking out at the dark shapes of trees against the night sky. I always liked it here, Daniel said after a while. Your home. It has a piece to it. Is that why you came back? After Sarah? He nodded. Partly, your father offered, and I didn't have anywhere else I wanted to be. He paused, glancing at me. I didn't know you'd be here. Would it have changed your mind? If you'd known. Daniel considered this, his profile illuminated by the faint light spilling from the kitchen window. I don't know. Maybe it should have. But it wouldn't have, I said, not a question. His lips curved in a small, sad smile. No, it wouldn't have. We fell silent again, the night air cool against my skin, Daniel's presence warm beside me. A comfortable silence, despite everything. I used to watch you, Daniel said suddenly, still looking out at the darkness. When you were growing up, not in a... He broke off, shaking his head. That came out wrong. I know what you mean, I said, moving a half step closer. He nodded, grateful. You were always so... confident. Sure of yourself in a way I never was at your age. The way you'd stand up to your father when you thought he was wrong. The way you never tried to be someone you weren't. I laughed softly. You've got it backwards. I spent years pretending to be someone else. Someone... straighter. Someone who fit better in this town. Daniel turned to look at me fully then, surprise evident in his expression. You think I didn't know? Ethan, I've known you were gay since you were 16. It was my turn to be surprised. How? A small smile touched his lips. The way you looked at that lifeguard at the lake one summer. Like he hung the moon. I recognized it because... He hesitated, then pushed on. Because it was the same way I'd looked at boys when I was your age. Before I learned to hide it. The confession hung in the night air between us, more intimate somehow than our earlier moments in the garage. This wasn't just about what was happening now. This was about who we were, who we had always been. You never said anything, I said quietly. All these years. Daniel's hand found the railing inches from mine. It wasn't my place, and I had my own secrets to keep. Sarah? He nodded. She knew, I think. Not everything, but enough. It's part of why she left. Said she was tired of competing with ghosts. I let that sink in, understanding dawning slowly. And my father? Does he know? About me? Daniel's laugh was soft, humorless. No, at least, I don't think so. Robert sees what he expects to see, always has. Impulsively, I covered his hand with mine on the railing. I'm sorry you had to hide. He looked down at our hands, then back at my face. The moonlight silvered his features, making him look both younger and older somehow, ageless, timeless. I'm not hiding now, he said softly. The words hung between us, an invitation or a declaration, I wasn't sure which. But I knew I wanted to answer it either way. Slowly, Giving him time to pull away, I moved closer until our bodies were almost touching. Daniel remained still, his eyes never leaving mine, his breath coming quicker. "Ethan," he whispered, a warning or a plea. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I leaned forward and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, a question asked in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Then Daniel made a sound, low in his throat, and his hand came up to cup the back of my neck, pulling me closer. Everything shifted, intensified. His lips were warm and firm against mine, his stubble rough against my skin. He tasted like pizza and something darker, something uniquely him. I found myself pressing closer, my hands fisting in his shirt, wanting more, needing it. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Daniel's eyes were wide, stunned, his lips slightly parted. He looked younger suddenly, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. "That was—" he started, then stopped, shaking his head as if words weren't enough. "Yeah," I agreed, understanding perfectly. We stood there on the porch, foreheads touching, sharing the same air, both trying to process what had just happened. The world felt different somehow, sharper, more vivid. Then, from inside the house, a phone rang. The landline, shrill and insistent. Reality crashed back. Daniel stepped away from me, his expression shifting from wonder to caution. "It could be your parents," he said, already moving toward the door. I followed him inside, watching as he answered the phone. His posture relaxed almost immediately, telling me it wasn't my father on the line. "Yes, Mrs. Kendrick, we're fine," he was saying, his voice carefully normal. "Just getting some air on the porch. No, we haven't eaten your lemon bars yet, but I'm sure they're delicious." "Yes, I'll tell him. Good night." He hung up, turning to me with a rueful smile. "Your neighbor wanted to make sure we found the lemon bars she left on the front porch earlier, and to warn us that your father called her, asking if she'd check on the house tomorrow since there might be more storms coming." The mention of my father sent a chill through the warm glow of moments before. Daniel must have seen it in my face, because he moved closer, his hand finding mine. "Hey," he said softly, "it's okay." But it wasn't, not really. Because tomorrow my parents would be home, and whatever was happening between Daniel and me would have to be hidden away. Denied. The thought made my chest ache. "Is it?" I asked, hating the uncertainty in my voice. "Because from where I'm standing, this seems pretty complicated." Daniel's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, the simple touch grounding me. "It is complicated," he agreed, "but that doesn't mean it's not real." My words from earlier returned to me in his voice. It made something warm bloom in my chest. "So what now?" I asked. Daniel sighed, bringing our joined hands up to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that made my breath catch. "Now we figure it out. One step at a time." It wasn't a solution, wasn't even a plan. But somehow, standing in my parents' kitchen with Daniel's hand in mine, it felt like enough for tonight. Later, as we climbed the stairs together, the memory of last night's hallway encounter hung between us. We paused at the top, at the place where our paths diverged, me to my childhood bedroom, him to the guest room. "Good night, Ethan," Daniel said, his voice soft in the darkened hallway. I nodded, suddenly shy despite everything that had passed between us. "Good night." He hesitated, then leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. "Sleep well." As I watched him walk away, I was struck by the strangeness of it all, how the man I'd known my whole life, a steady figure in my childhood, had suddenly transformed into someone new, someone who made my heart race and my thoughts scatter. But no, not transformed, revealed. This was who Daniel had always been, beneath the layers of pretense and expectation. I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. He was always a steady figure in my childhood, I thought as I closed my bedroom door, but now I see the man he hides from everyone else. Morning came with a sense of surreality, as if the previous day had been a dream. But the memory of Daniel's lips on mine was too vivid, too physical to be anything but real. I found him in the garage, the door open to let in the morning light. He was kneeling beside my father's motorcycle, tools spread around him on an old blanket. "Your dad mentioned the carburetor was acting up," he said by way of greeting. "Thought I'd take a look before he gets back." I leaned against the doorframe, watching him work. His movements were precise, confident, a man in his element. It was oddly intimate, seeing him like this, caring for my father's possessions with such attention. "Coffee's on the counter," he added, not looking up from the motorcycle. "Made it fresh about 10 minutes ago." "Thanks," I said, but didn't move. Daniel glanced up then, his eyes finding mine. Something in his expression softened. "Sleep okay?" I nodded. "You?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Better than the night before." The simple acknowledgement of what had changed between us made warmth spread through my chest. I pushed off from the doorframe, moving to crouch beside him. "Show me what you're doing," I asked, nodding toward the motorcycle. He looked surprised, then pleased. "Sure." "Hand me that wrench." We worked side by side for nearly an hour, Daniel explaining each step as he went, my hands occasionally brushing his as we passed tools back and forth. It was comfortable, this quiet collaboration, punctuated by fleeting touches that sent electricity through my veins. At one point, Daniel set down his tools with a sigh. "I need a better light to see what I'm doing. There's a flashlight in that toolbox over there." I reached for it, rummaging through the jumbled tools until I found the heavy maglite my father always used. When I turned back, Daniel was watching me, something heated in his gaze. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. He shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "Nothing, just you." The simple word held such weight, such meaning. I moved back to him, flashlight forgotten in my hand. "Daniel," I said, his name a question and an answer both. He reached for me then, his hand curling around the back of my neck, pulling me closer. Our lips met in a kiss that was nothing like the hesitant exploration of the night before. This was hunger, raw and unfiltered. I dropped the flashlight, my hands finding his shoulders, his chest, anywhere I could touch. He made a sound against my mouth, half groan, half sigh, and pulled me closer until I was practically in his lap, the motorcycle forgotten beside us. His hands were everywhere, in my hair, on my back, slipping under the hem of my t-shirt to find skin. I gasped at the contact, at the rough warmth of his palms against my lower back. "Ethan," he murmured against my mouth, my name a prayer and a curse. "We should—" Whatever he was about to say was cut short by the sound of tires on gravel, a car pulling into the driveway. We broke apart, panic surging through me. Daniel was on his feet in an instant, peering through the garage window. He hissed, "It's your father's car!" Cold dread replaced the warmth that had suffused me moments before. "That's not possible. They're not due back until tonight." But even as I said it, I heard car doors slamming, followed by my mother's laugh, high and clear in the morning air. Daniel and I stared at each other, both disheveled, lips swollen from kissing. There was no way to hide what we'd been doing, no explanation that would make sense. "The back door," Daniel said quickly. "Go inside, clean up. I'll stay here, keep working on the motorcycle." I nodded, already moving toward the house. But before I could get far, the side door of the garage opened, and there stood my father, a smile on his face that quickly gave way to confusion as he took in the scene before him. "Ethan, I didn't know you were home," he said, stepping into the garage. "Your mother and I decided to come back early. The weather at the coast turned nasty." I forced a smile, hoping my face wasn't as flushed as it felt. "Surprise! I got in Friday night." My father's gaze moved to Daniel, who had somehow composed himself and was now crouched beside the motorcycle again, wrench in hand, as if he'd never stopped working. "Daniel," my father said warmly, "I see you're fixing that carburetor. Thanks, man." Daniel nodded, his voice remarkably steady. "Almost got it figured out. Just needed a better light." He gestured to the flashlight, still on the floor where I'd dropped it. My father looked between us, something questioning in his gaze. "Everything okay in here? You both look a little tense." "Fine," I said quickly. "Daniel was just showing me how to fix the carburetor. I was about to go inside for more coffee. Your mother's putting on a pot now, my father said, still studying us. Why don't you both come in? She's dying to see you, Ethan. There was no way to refuse without seeming suspicious. I nodded, avoiding Daniel's gaze. Sure, let me just wash up. As my father turned to lead the way, Daniel caught my eye briefly. The look we shared was laden with meaning, regret, frustration, a promise to continue what we'd started. Then the moment passed, and we were following my father into the house, back to reality, back to pretending. The day passed in a haze of forced normalcy. My mother fussed over me, asking about my job plans, my apartment in the city. My father talked about their weekend at the coast, the friends they'd seen, the restaurants they'd tried. Daniel and I orbited each other carefully, never too close. Never alone. It was torture, being in the same room with him and having to act as if nothing had changed. Every accidental glance, every near touch as we passed dishes at lunch felt charged with meaning that only we understood. By late afternoon, the pretense had worn me thin. I excused myself to get some work done on my laptop, escaping to my bedroom like a teenager, desperate for solitude. I didn't expect Daniel to follow me, but 10 minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, he stood there, glancing nervously down the hallway. Your parents went to the grocery store, he said quietly. We have maybe 20 minutes. I pulled him into my room, closing the door behind us. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the tension of the day finally releasing. This is insane, I said, running a hand through my hair. I feel like I'm going crazy down there. Daniel nodded, keeping his distance, though I could see the effort it cost him. I know, it's difficult. Difficult, I repeated with a hollow laugh. That's one word for it. He moved closer then, his hand coming up to cup my face. Ethan, Whatever he was about to say was cut short by the sound of the front door opening, followed by my mother's voice calling up the stairs. We're back! They were closed for inventory. Can you believe it? Daniel, are you still here? Daniel stepped away from me quickly, his hand dropping to his side. I should go help with the groceries, he said, his voice strained. I nodded, disappointment a bitter taste in my mouth. Yeah, go. He hesitated, then leaned in quickly, pressing a kiss to my lips that was over almost before it began. We'll figure this out, he whispered. Then he was gone, pulling my bedroom door closed behind him. I sat heavily on my bed, touching my fingers to my lips, wondering how something so new could already feel so essential, so impossible to give up. Dinner that night was an exercise in restraint. Every time Daniel spoke, I found myself watching his mouth, remembering how it felt against mine. Every time he reached for the salt or the water pitcher, I studied his hands, recalling their strength and gentleness. If my parents noticed anything amiss, they didn't show it. My father talked about work, my mother about her garden plans for the fall. Normal family dinner conversation, while beneath the table, Daniel's knee occasionally pressed against mine. Brief, deliberate contacts that sent heat racing through me. After dinner, Daniel announced he'd be leaving in the morning. The closing on the house is tomorrow afternoon, he explained, his eyes meeting mine briefly before returning to my father. And I found an apartment to rent, month to month, while I figure things out. Where? I asked, unable to keep the question in. Riverside, he said. About 40 minutes from here. Not Chicago, not where I was heading in a few weeks. The realization settled heavily in my chest. Well, we've loved having you, my mother said warmly. You're welcome any time, Daniel. You know that. My father nodded in agreement. The guest room is yours whenever you need it. Daniel smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Thank you, both of you. It's meant more than you know. Later, as my parents settled in the living room to watch their Sunday night shows, Daniel slipped outside to the porch. I waited 5 minutes before following, making an excuse about getting some air. I found him leaning against the railing, looking out at the darkened yard. He didn't turn when I approached, but I saw his shoulders tense, recognizing my presence. So, I said, keeping my voice low. You're leaving tomorrow. He nodded. I have to. The closing. I know. I moved to stand beside him, our arms almost touching. And then? Daniel sighed, finally turning to look at me. And then I start over. New place, new life. Without me, I said, the words more bitter than I'd intended. His expression softened. Ethan, no, I get it, I cut in. This was… what? A momentary lapse? A mistake? You know it wasn't, he said quietly. But you're heading to Chicago in a few weeks. You have a whole life ahead of you. A career, new people, new experiences. And you're not part of that? I challenged. Daniel's hand found mine on the railing, his fingers intertwining with mine. I don't know what I am, he admitted. This is all happening so fast. Yesterday morning, I was just your father's friend staying in the guest room. And now… He looked at me, his eyes dark and serious in the faint light from the windows. Now I can't imagine not touching you, not being with you, and it terrifies me. The raw honesty in his voice made my throat tight. Me too, I whispered, but I still want it. Want you. Daniel's free hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. You should be with someone your own age, someone who doesn't come with all my baggage, all my complications. Shouldn't that be my choice? I asked. Before he could answer, the porch light flickered on, making us both step apart quickly. Ethan, my mother called through the screen door. Your father wants to know if you're staying through tomorrow or heading back to the city tonight? I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to sound normal. I'll stay through tomorrow. My bus isn't until the evening. Wonderful, she said. We'll have a proper family lunch before you go. Daniel, you're welcome to join us before your closing, of course. Daniel smiled, though I could see the strain in it. Thank you, Helen. That's very kind. When she'd gone back inside, we stood in silence, the moment broken. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, sighing. I should go to bed, he said finally. Early start tomorrow. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He hesitated, then leaned in, pressing a kiss to my temple, chaste enough to look innocent if someone were to see, intimate enough to make my heart race. Good night, Ethan, he whispered against my skin. I watched him go inside, feeling like something precious was slipping through my fingers before I'd even had a chance to hold it properly. Morning came too quickly. I woke to the sounds of movement in the guest room, Daniel packing his few belongings. For a moment I lay still, listening to his footsteps, the opening and closing of drawers. Then I forced myself out of bed, dressing quickly. I found him in the kitchen with my parents, drinking coffee and eating the pancakes my mother had made. He looked up when I entered, something softening in his expression. Morning, he said. Your mom made enough pancakes to feed an army. My mother smiled, pushing a plate toward me. Sit, eat. Daniel was just telling us about his new apartment. I sat, trying to focus on the conversation and not on the way Daniel's fingers wrapped around his coffee mug, the way his throat moved when he swallowed, the memories of his touch that haunted me. Breakfast passed in a blur of small talk and forced smiles. When Daniel announced he should get going, my stomach knotted with anxiety. This couldn't be it, couldn't be the end of whatever had started between us. I'll walk you out, I said, standing as he gathered his bag. My parents hugged him goodbye, extracting promises to visit soon, to call, to join them for dinner next weekend. Then, finally, we were alone, walking to his truck parked in the driveway. So, I said, watching as he tossed his bag into the passenger seat. So, he echoed, turning to face me. We stood a careful distance apart, aware of the house behind us, my parents potentially watching from the windows. Is this it? I asked, hating how vulnerable I sounded. Daniel's eyes met mine, serious and intent. No, he said simply. Not if you don't want it to be. Relief flooded through me. I don't. Then it isn't. He hesitated, glancing back at the house. But we need to be smart about this. Careful. I know, I said. My father… It's not just about your father, Daniel cut in gently. It's about giving this, whatever this is, a chance to be real. Away from this house, these circumstances. I nodded, understanding what he meant. What had started here, in this bubble of temporary isolation, needed to survive in the real world if it was going to mean anything. I go back to the city tonight, I said, but I can come to Riverside next weekend. Before Chicago. A small smile touched his lips. I'd like that. We stood there, the morning sun warm on our shoulders, so much left unsaid between us. I wanted to touch him, to kiss him goodbye, but we were too exposed, too visible. As if reading my thoughts, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. Get in, he said, nodding toward the truck. Just for a minute. I glanced back at the house, then slid into the passenger seat as Daniel rounded the hood and got behind the wheel. He started the engine, but didn't put the truck in gear, just let it idle in the driveway. I wanted a moment, he explained, his voice low. Just us. In the privacy of the truck cab, he reached for me, his hand finding mine on the seat between us. His touch was warm, familiar already despite how new this was. I don't know what this is, he said, echoing my words from the garage. I don't know where it's going, but I want to find out. I squeezed his hand, relief and hope mingling in my chest. Me too. Daniel looked at me then, his gaze tracing over my face as if committing it to memory. I should go, he said reluctantly. The closing. I nodded, but neither of us moved to let go. If I stay any longer, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, I might not be able to walk away. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I knew he was talking about more than just this moment in the truck. He was talking about us, about the pull between us that seemed to defy logic and circumstance. Then don't, I whispered, though I knew he had to. Daniel's hand tightened on mine, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. Riverside, he said. Next weekend. Next weekend, I confirmed. He lifted our joined hands then, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that made my breath catch. And still, he didn't let go. Outside the truck, life continued. Birds sang, clouds drifted across the blue September sky. My parents went about their morning routine inside the house. But in this moment, in this space, there was only Daniel and me, and the promise of something neither of us had dared to expect. Whatever came next, Chicago, distance, the complications of family and history, we would face it. Together or apart, we were connected now, bound by touches and whispers and moments stolen in the spaces between. And for now, that was enough. The bus ride back to the city felt endless. I watched through this window as familiar landscapes gave way to urban sprawl, my mind still in that truck with Daniel, his words echoing. If I stay any longer, I might not be able to walk away. Yet he had walked away, had to, we both knew it. But the promise of Riverside next weekend hung before me like a light in darkness. 6 days. I just had to get through 6 days. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, emptier somehow. My roommate was out of town visiting his girlfriend, leaving me alone with thoughts that circled endlessly. Daniel's hands, his voice, the weight of his gaze. The taste of his lips, the wild impossibility of what had happened between us. I tried to focus on work, on preparations for my move to Chicago, but everything felt distant, unimportant compared to the magnetic pull of memory. Tuesday night, unable to sleep, I finally gave in and texted him. You awake? 3 minutes later, my phone lit up. Yes, can't sleep. My heart raced at those 3 simple words. Me neither. Thinking about you, came his reply after a long pause. I stared at the screen, heat blooming in my chest. This was real. Whatever had happened in my parents' house wasn't just a fever dream born of proximity and circumstance. I keep replaying everything in my head, I texted back. Same, probably shouldn't. Why not? Another pause, longer this time. Because I'm alone in an empty apartment with 4 more days until I see you again. The words sent a shiver through me. I typed back before I could second-guess myself. Call me? My phone rang almost immediately. I answered on the first ring, my heart in my throat. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice low and rough, as if he hadn't used it in hours. "Hey," I replied, curling onto my side in bed, phone pressed to my ear. For a moment, neither of us spoke, content just to listen to each other breathe across the miles between us. "How's the apartment?" I asked finally. "Empty," he said. "Echoes when I talk. But it's clean, close to work. It'll do for now." "For now?" He sighed softly. "I'm still figuring things out, Ethan. Where I want to be. What I want to do next." "And us?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "Are you figuring that out too?" There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Yes, but not in the way you're thinking. I'm not questioning this. Whatever it is." Relief flooded through me. "Good. Because I'm not either. But we need to be realistic," he continued. "Chicago is a 4-hour drive from here, and there's your father to consider." My father. The name fell between us like a stone, reminding me of all the complications beyond distance. "I know," I said quietly, "but I still want this. Want you." "I want you too," he admitted, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "More than I should." We talked for hours after that, about nothing and everything. His new job at a construction company, my upcoming interviews in Chicago, books we'd read, movies we'd seen, memories we shared from different perspectives. It was easy, comfortable, as if we'd been having late-night conversations our whole lives. When I finally fell asleep, phone still pressed to my ear, it was to the sound of Daniel's steady breathing and the promise of Saturday hovering like dawn on the horizon. The week crawled by. We texted constantly, called each night. Thursday, I found myself in a bookstore, picking up a novel Daniel had mentioned loving. Friday, I cleaned my apartment obsessively, though I knew I wouldn't be seeing it over the weekend. Saturday morning, I woke before my alarm, a mix of excitement and anxiety churning in my stomach. I showered, changed shirts 3 times, then laughed at myself in the mirror. I was acting like a teenager before a first date, not a grown man of 23. But this wasn't just any date. This was Daniel. This was real outside the bubble of my parents' house, away from stolen moments and whispered confessions. This was us choosing each other deliberately, with full awareness of the complications and consequences. The bus ride to Riverside took 40 minutes, but felt like hours. I watched the scenery change through the window, trying to calm my racing heart, the questions that tumbled through my mind. What if the magic wasn't there anymore? What if, away from the charged atmosphere of those few days together, we found we had nothing in common, nothing to say to each other? Daniel was waiting at the bus station, leaning against his truck, arms crossed over his chest. He straightened when he saw me, a smile breaking across his face that made my doubts evaporate like morning mist. "Hi," he said simply as I approached, his eyes drinking me in. "Hi," I replied, stopping a careful distance away, suddenly unsure of the protocol. Were we supposed to shake hands? Hug? Kiss? Daniel solved the dilemma by reaching for my duffel bag, his fingers brushing mine as he took it. "Let me." Even that brief touch sent electricity up my arm. 6 days apart hadn't diminished whatever this was between us. If anything, it had intensified. "How was the trip?" he asked as we walked to his truck. "Fine," I said, though I barely remembered it, too focused on this moment, on him. He looked good, better than good. He'd gotten a haircut, the silver at his temples more pronounced against the fresh trim. He wore a blue button-down shirt I hadn't seen before, the sleeves rolled up to expose tanned forearms. "You cut your hair," I said, as he loaded my bag into the truck. He ran a self-conscious hand through it. "Yeah, needed a change, I guess. I like it." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Thanks." In the truck, a comfortable silence fell between us. I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, the scent of his aftershave, the way his hands rested on the steering wheel, the occasional glance he cast my way. "Hungry?" he asked as we pulled out of the station. I nodded, realizing I'd been too nervous to eat breakfast. Starving. There's a place downtown I thought we could try. Unless you'd rather see the apartment first. I looked at him then, taking in the slight uncertainty in his expression. Daniel Hayes, always confident and sure, was nervous too. The realization made something warm bloom in my chest. Food first, I said. Then you can show me your new place. He nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Good plan. The restaurant was a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on Riverside's main street. It was busy but not crowded, the atmosphere casual and welcoming. We found a table by the window, ordering coffee and brunch from a friendly waitress who called Daniel by name. You've been here before, I observed after she left. He nodded. A few times this week. It's close to the office, and I got tired of my own cooking pretty quickly. You cook? I asked, surprised. A smile touched his lips. Don't sound so shocked. I lived alone before Sarah, you know, and even during our marriage, I did most of the cooking. I didn't know that, I said, realizing how little I actually knew about his daily life, his habits, despite having known him my whole life. There's a lot we don't know about each other, he said, as if reading my thoughts. The real stuff, beyond the surface. I want to learn, I said simply. His eyes met mine, something softening in his expression. Me too. Our food arrived, French toast for me, an omelet for him. We ate and talked, the initial nervousness giving way to the same easy conversation we'd had on the phone. Daniel told me about his new job, about the apartment he'd rented in a converted warehouse downtown. I told him about my preparations for Chicago, the mix of excitement and anxiety about starting over somewhere new. When do you leave? He asked, his coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. 3 weeks, I said. The 15th. He nodded, setting down his mug. And you're sure about this job? It's what you want? The question surprised me. No one, not even my parents, had asked me that. They'd all just assumed, as I had, that the Chicago opportunity was the logical next step. I think so, I said slowly. It's a good firm, good starting salary, and Chicago's a great city. But, Daniel prompted, hearing the hesitation in my voice. I sighed, staring down at my plate. But it's Chicago. 4 hours away, like you said. Our eyes met across the table, the unspoken implication hanging between us. 4 hours away from him. Don't make decisions based on this, Daniel said quietly, gesturing between us. On me. It's too new, too uncertain. Is it? I challenged. Uncertain? His expression turned serious. You know what I mean, Ethan. We've had a few days together. Some phone calls. That's not enough to change your life plans for. What if I want it to be? Daniel's hand found mine on the table, his fingers warm against my skin. Then we take it day by day. See where this goes. Chicago isn't the moon. It's a 4-hour drive. We can make it work, if that's what we both want. The simple touch, the certainty in his voice, steadied something inside me. This wasn't an ending before we'd begun. It was a beginning, complicated and uncertain as all beginnings are. Okay, I said, turning my hand to intertwine our fingers. Day by day. His thumb traced circles on my skin, a small gesture that made my heart race. Starting with today. Daniel's apartment was exactly as he'd described it, a converted warehouse space downtown with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and large windows overlooking the river that gave the town its name. It was sparsely furnished, just the essentials, with moving boxes still stacked in corners. It's temporary, he explained as he showed me around. Month-to-month lease while I figure out my next move. I like it, I said, drawn to the large windows and the view beyond. It suits you somehow. He came to stand beside me, looking out at the river. How so? I shrugged, trying to put the feeling into words. It's straightforward, honest, no pretense. A small smile touched his lips. That's a nice way of saying it's unfinished. No, I said, turning to face him. That's not what I meant. It's authentic, like you. Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or recognition. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, illuminating the space between us. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, he closed that space. His hand came up to cup my face, tentative at first, then more certain as I leaned into his touch. "I've been wanting to do this since I saw you get off that bus," he murmured, his voice low. "What stopped you?" I asked, my own hands finding his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. "People were watching," he said with a small smile. "And I wasn't sure. If I still wanted this," I finished for him, "if it was real outside of my parents' house." He nodded, his thumb tracing my cheekbone in a way that made my breath catch. "And do you still want this?" In answer, I leaned forward and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was different from our first, less desperate, more deliberate. We took our time, learning each other's rhythms, the ways our bodies fit together. His hands moved to my back, pulling me closer until we were flush against each other, heartbeats synchronizing. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "This is crazy," he whispered. "You know that, right?" "Why?" I asked, my hand still at his waist, unwilling to let go. "Because of my father? Because of the age difference?" He opened his eyes, meeting my gaze. "Both. Neither. I don't know anymore." "Does it matter?" I countered. "If it feels right?" A small smile touched his lips. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," I said, matching his smile with my own. "You just never noticed." His smile widened into a genuine laugh, a sound I was quickly becoming addicted to. "Oh, I noticed," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "I noticed a lot of things about you over the years." The admission made warmth bloom in my chest. "Like what?" Daniel's eyes traced my face, as if memorizing it. "Like how you never backed down when you believed in something. How you'd stand up to your father when everyone else just went along with him. How you could silence a room with just a look. You get that from your mother, by the way." I laughed, surprised by the observation. "I do?" He nodded, his expression softening. "And how you always saw more than you let on. Even as a kid, you watched everything, everyone. Especially me." The last words were quieter, more tentative. "I did watch you," I admitted. "More than I should have, probably." "Why?" he asked, his hands moving to my shoulders, down my arms, as if he couldn't stop touching me now that he'd started. I considered the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. "Because you were always so present, so solid. When you were in a room, you anchored it somehow. I think I was drawn to that stability, even before I understood why." Daniel's expression turned thoughtful. "I never felt stable, not really. I always felt like I was performing somehow, being the person everyone expected me to be. Your father's best friend, Sarah's husband, the guy who had it all figured out." "And now?" I asked. A small smile touched his lips. "Now I feel like I'm finally being honest. With myself, with you." The simple confession moved me more than any declaration of love could have. I leaned in, kissing him again, trying to convey everything I couldn't yet put into words. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blend of conversation and discovery of each other, of the boundaries of this new thing between us. We talked about everything and nothing, moving from the couch to the kitchen to make dinner together, to the bedroom where we lay side by side, clothed but intimate, learning the contours of each other's bodies with hesitant, exploring hands. There was no rush, no pressure. We had time. This weekend, at least, was ours alone. As evening fell, we sat on the small balcony off the living room, watching the sunset paint the river in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel's arm was around my shoulders, my head resting against him, a glass of wine in my free hand. "I need to tell you something," he said suddenly, his voice serious. I tensed slightly, lifting my head to look at him. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine. Your father called this morning before you arrived. He wants to come up next weekend, see the new place, maybe go fishing at the lake nearby. The words fell between us like stones, disrupting the peaceful moment. What did you say? I said yes, Daniel replied, his expression conflicted. I couldn't think of a reason to say no without raising questions. I nodded slowly, understanding the dilemma. Of course. Ethan, he said, his hand finding mine. We need to talk about this. About your father. About what we tell him, when we tell him, if we tell him. The question I'd been avoiding since that first touch in the hallway. I sighed, looking out at the darkening sky. I know. I've been his best friend for 30 years. Daniel continued quietly. He's been there for me through everything. My father's death, the divorce, all of it. The thought of hurting him, of betraying his trust. And I'm his son, I said, finishing the thought. His only child. If this continues, we'll have to tell him eventually. Daniel's fingers tightened around mine. Would you be okay with that, with him knowing? I considered the question, trying to imagine my father's reaction. He wasn't homophobic, at least not overtly. When I'd come out to my parents at 18, he'd been awkward but accepting. But this, his best friend and his son, was different. Complicated in ways I couldn't fully predict. I don't know, I admitted finally. I want to say yes, that I don't care what anyone thinks, but he's my dad. His opinion matters, even when I pretend it doesn't. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. We don't have to decide everything tonight. We can take it slow, figure it out as we go. But my leaving for Chicago doesn't change anything, he cut in gently. Like I said, we'll make it work, if that's what we both want. The question hung unspoken between us. Is that what we both want? I looked at him in the fading light, this man I'd known my whole life and was only now truly seeing. The silver in his hair caught the last rays of sunlight, his eyes steady on mine, patient and certain despite all the uncertainty surrounding us. It's what I want, I said simply. A smile touched his lips, relief evident in his expression. Me too. We sealed the agreement with a kiss that tasted of wine and promise, of questions still unanswered but faced together. Whatever came next, Chicago, my father, the complications of building something real from these fragile beginnings, we would navigate it day by day, moment by moment. And for now, that was enough. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows, painting patterns on the wall as I blinked awake. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar room throwing me. Then I felt the weight of Daniel's arm around my waist, his breath warm against the back of my neck, and remembered exactly where I was. We'd spent the night together, not in the fullest sense, but in all the ways that mattered. Sharing a bed, falling asleep to the sound of each other's breathing, waking occasionally in the night to find ourselves still entwined. I shifted slightly, turning to face him without disturbing his arm around me. In sleep, Daniel looked younger, the lines on his face softened, his usual alertness giving way to peaceful vulnerability. I studied him in the morning light, the sweep of his eyelashes, the slight stubble darkening his jaw, the small scar near his temple I'd never noticed before. As if sensing my gaze, his eyes opened, focusing slowly on my face. A smile spread across his lips, genuine and unguarded. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, returning his smile. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the reality of waking up together sinking in. Then, Daniel's hand moved to my face, tracing the line of my jaw with gentle fingers. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "None. You?" "Just that you have to leave today," he said, with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The reminder of my departing bus sent a pang through me. We had hours yet, but the countdown had begun, ticking away the moments we had left. "Let's not think about that yet," I said, leaning forward to press a kiss to the corner of his mouth. Daniel's response was to pull me closer, his lips finding mine in a kiss that quickly deepened, morning breath forgotten in the heat that sparked between us. His hands moved down my back, under the t-shirt turtle I'd borrowed to sleep in, warm against my skin. "Ethan," he murmured against my mouth, a question and a warning both. I understood his hesitation, the line we hadn't yet crossed. "It's okay," I whispered back. "I want this. Want you." His eyes searched mine, making sure. Then, seeming satisfied with what he saw, he kissed me again. More deeply this time, his body shifting until he was half over me, his weight a welcome pressure. What followed was a slow discovery of each other's bodies, responses, boundaries. Daniel was careful, attentive, his experience evident in the way he read my reactions, adjusted his touch. I was more enthusiastic than skilled, but what I lacked in technique I made up for in eagerness to learn to please. Afterward, we lay together in the tangled sheets, my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder, a touch so casual yet intimate it made my throat tight with emotion. "You okay?" he asked, picking up on my sudden tension. I nodded against his chest. "Just processing." His hand stilled on my shoulder. "Regrets, after all?" "No," I said quickly, lifting my head to meet his eyes. "No, the opposite." Relief washed over his face. "Good. Because that was—" "Yeah," I agreed, understanding perfectly. "It was." A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only by the distant sounds of the city coming to life outside. Church bells, a car horn, voices on the street below. "We should get up," Daniel said eventually, though he made no move to do so. "Get some breakfast. Make the most of the time we have left." The reminder of my departure sent another pang through me, but I pushed it aside. "5 more minutes," I murmured, settling back against his chest. His laugh rumbled beneath my ear. 5 more minutes. Those 5 minutes stretched into 30, neither of us willing to break the spell of the morning. When we finally did get up, it was with reluctance, stealing kisses as we passed each other in the bathroom, the hallway, the kitchen. We made breakfast together, Daniel cooking eggs while I handled toast and coffee, moving around each other with a synchronicity that felt both new and familiar, as if we'd been doing this for years rather than hours. "I could get used to this," Daniel said, watching me pour coffee into mugs. The casual comment held weight, implications that made my heart race. "Me too," I said simply. His eyes met mine across the kitchen, something vulnerable in his expression. 3 weeks to Chicago." 3 weeks, I echoed. "But next weekend—" "Your father," he finished, the reminder like a splash of cold water. I set down the coffee pot, leaning against the counter. "What are we going to do about that?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Act normal, I guess. As normal as possible." "And us?" I asked. "When will I see you again?" He moved closer, his hands finding my waist. "I was thinking I could drive up to the city one night this week, taking you to dinner before you go back to your parents for the weekend." The suggestion, the easy way he was already planning for our next meeting, made warmth bloom in my chest. "I'd like that." "Wednesday?" he suggested. "I could drive up after work." I nodded, my hands finding his shoulders. "Wednesday sounds perfect." He kissed me then, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. The rest of the morning passed too quickly. Breakfast, a walk along the riverfront, back to the apartment to gather my things. Before I knew it, we were in Daniel's truck. Heading to the bus station, the minutes slipping away like sand through an hourglass. At the station, Daniel parked but left the engine running, both of us aware of the public nature of our goodbye. He turned to me, his expression a mix of emotions I couldn't fully read. "So," he said, his hand finding mine on the seat between us. "So," I echoed, unwilling to be the first to say goodbye. "Call me when you get home," he said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "And we'll figure out Wednesday." I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. "And next weekend? With my father?" A shadow crossed his face. "We'll be careful. Take it one step at a time." The pragmatic answer should have reassured me, but something in his tone made anxiety flicker in my chest. Daniel, are you having second thoughts? His eyes snapped to mine, surprise evident in his expression. No, God, no. His hand tightened on mine. Are you? No, I said quickly. It's just... This is complicated. I'd understand if you... Ethan, he cut in, his voice gentle but firm. I'm not having second thoughts. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, there are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't work. But I wanted to, want you. The simple declaration eased the tightness in my chest. I leaned across the seat, not caring who might see, and kissed him, quickly, but with feeling. I have to go, I said, pulling back reluctantly. My bus. Daniel nodded, releasing my hand. Wednesday, I confirmed, reaching for my bag. As I climbed out of the truck, Daniel rolled down the window. Ethan, he called, making me turn back. Yeah? His eyes met mine, serious and intent. If I stay any longer, I might not be able to walk away. The words from our last parting, repeated now with new meaning, new depth. I swallowed hard, nodding my understanding. Then go, I said softly. For now. A small smile touched his lips. For now. I watched his truck pull away, carrying part of my heart with it. The weekend had changed everything and nothing. We were still caught between worlds, between relationships, between the past and an uncertain future. But now, at least, we were caught together. Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. I threw myself into work, into preparations for Chicago, anything to make the time pass more quickly. We talked every night, texts throughout the day. Small glimpses into each other's lives that bridged the distance between us. Tuesday night, as we spoke on the phone, Daniel mentioned the upcoming weekend with my father again. He wants to leave Saturday morning, he said, his voice careful. Drive up together. The thought of my father and Daniel, alone in a car for 40 minutes, made anxiety twist in my stomach. What are you going to tell him? About us, I mean. There was a pause on the line. Nothing for now, Daniel said finally. It's not just my secret to tell, Ethan. It's yours, too. The consideration touched me, but also troubled me. I don't want to be your secret, I said quietly. I know, he sighed. And you won't be, not forever. But this isn't something to rush into. Your father. I know, I cut in, hearing the strain in his voice. You're right, one step at a time. We changed the subject after that, but the conversation lingered in my mind, raising questions I didn't have answers for. How long could we keep this hidden? What would happen when my father eventually found out? Would it destroy his friendship with Daniel? His relationship with me? These thoughts were still swirling when I spotted Daniel's truck outside my apartment building on Wednesday evening. He stood leaning against it, hands in his pockets, looking up at the windows as if trying to guess which one was mine. Something in my chest expanded at the sight of him, this complicated, wonderful man who had somehow become the center of my thoughts in the span of a week. I took the stairs down 2 at a time, pushing through the building's front door and into the warm evening air. Daniel spotted me immediately, a smile breaking across his face that made my heart race. Hi, he said simply as I approached. Hi, I replied, stopping just short of touching him, aware of the open street around us. His eyes searched my face, taking me in as if memorizing me. You look good. So do you, I said, meaning it. He was dressed more formally than usual, dark jeans, a charcoal button-down, a leather jacket I hadn't seen before. I made reservations, he said, nodding toward the truck. Italian place about 15 minutes from here. Unless you'd rather stay in? The question held possibilities that made heat rise to my face. The reservation sounds great, I said, though part of me wanted nothing more than to take him upstairs to my empty apartment. Daniel seemed to read my thoughts, a small smile playing at his lips. Later, he said quietly, opening the passenger door for me. The promise in that one word stayed with me throughout dinner. A lovely meal at a small Italian restaurant with candlelit tables and excellent wine. We talked easily about everything and nothing, careful to avoid the subject of my father, of the complications waiting for us beyond this evening. It was normal, almost mundane, a dinner date like any other. Except for the way Daniel's eyes lingered on mine across the table, the way his hand occasionally found mine, thumb tracing patterns on my skin that sent shivers up my arm. Back at my apartment, with my roommate still conveniently absent, the normalcy gave way to urgency. We barely made it through the door before Daniel's mouth was on mine, his hands in my hair, on my back, pulling me close as if he could erase the days apart through touch alone. "Missed you," he murmured against my lips as we stumbled toward my bedroom. "It was only 3 days," I laughed breathlessly, even as my own hands worked at the buttons of his shirt. "Too long," he replied, and the simple admission made something warm bloom in my chest. This time, our coming together was less hesitant, more certain. We knew each other's bodies now, what pleased, what teased. Daniel was still attentive, still careful, but there was an edge to his touch that hadn't been there before. A hunger that matched my own. After, as we lay tangled in my sheets, his arm around me, my head on his chest, I found myself thinking about time. How quickly it passed when we were together, how slowly when apart. 3 weeks until Chicago, less than 3 days until he saw my father. The countdown continued, inexorable. "Stay the night," I said suddenly, lifting my head to look at him. Daniel's eyes met mine, surprise evident in them. "Are you sure? I didn't bring anything with me." "We can stop for toothbrushes," I said, not wanting to let him go, not yet. "And you can borrow clothes. Just stay." Something in my voice must have conveyed my need, because his expression softened. "Okay," he said simply. "I'll stay." We fell asleep like that, still entwined, and for the second time, I experienced the peculiar joy of waking up beside Daniel Hayes. His warmth, his morning stubble, the way his eyes found mine immediately upon waking, as if I was the first thought in his mind. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, leaning in to kiss him despite morning breath and the early hour. He responded eagerly, his hands finding my waist, pulling me closer. For a while, the outside world ceased to exist. There was only us, this bed, this moment stretched into eternity. But reality intruded eventually, as it always did. Daniel had to work. I had deadlines to meet. We showered together, stealing kisses under the spray, then shared a quick breakfast of toast and coffee before it was time for him to go. At the door, he paused, his hand on the knob. "Saturday," he said, his expression turning serious. "With your father." I nodded, the reminder like a weight on my shoulders. "Be careful, he notices more than people think." A small smile touched Daniel's lips. "I've known him for 30 years, Ethan. I think I can handle one fishing trip." "It's not just fishing, though, is it?" I said quietly. "It's everything. Us. This." His smile faded, replaced by something more solemn. "I know, and I'll be careful." I reached for him then, one last kiss, before the real world claimed us again. "Call me after," I said against his lips. "Let me know how it goes." He nodded, his forehead resting against mine for a brief moment. "I will." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that echoed in the sudden emptiness of my apartment. Saturday arrived with a mix of anxiety and hope. I'd gone back to my parents' house Friday evening, preparing for the usual weekend at home before my upcoming move. My father had been excited about his trip to see Daniel, talking animatedly about fishing prospects and catching up. "He sounds good," my father said as we ate dinner. "Better than after the divorce, more like himself." The observation made something twist in my chest, pride that Daniel was finding his way back to himself, guilt that I couldn't share with my father the full reason why. My mother, ever perceptive, noticed my discomfort. "You've been quiet tonight, Ethan. Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired. Work's been busy, and I am still sorting out all the details for the move." She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, try to relax this weekend. Your father's going fishing with Daniel, so it'll be just you and me. We could watch that documentary series you mentioned." The thought of a quiet weekend with my mother, without the tension of Daniel and my father in the same house, was surprisingly appealing. "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. Later, as I lay in bed, my phone lit up with a text from Daniel. "Your father's picking me up at 7 a.m. We'll text when I can. Miss you." I stared at the screen, the simple messages making my heart race. "Miss you too. Be careful tomorrow." His reply came quickly. "Always am." "Good night, Ethan." "Good night," I texted back, adding after a brief hesitation. So I stopped, deleting the half-formed words. Too soon. Too much. Instead, I sent a simple heart emoji, the first time I'd done anything so explicitly romantic in our exchanges. Daniel's response was immediate. Another heart followed by "now go to sleep." I fell asleep smiling, clutching my phone like a teenage boy with his first crush. The next morning, I heard my father leave at 6:30, the familiar rumble of his truck fading into the distance. My mother and I shared a leisurely breakfast, then settled in the living room with the documentary series queued up on the television. It was a good day, comfortable, easy, but underneath the normalcy, I was acutely aware of the time passing, of Daniel and my father together, of all the ways this fragile new relationship could unravel. By late afternoon, I checked my phone so many times that my mother finally commented on it. "Expecting an important call?" she asked, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. "Just checking the time," I lied, slipping the phone back into my pocket. She didn't press, but I felt her watching me more carefully after that, her maternal instincts sensing something amiss. It was nearly 8 in the evening when my father's truck pulled into the driveway. I tried to appear casual as he came through the door, fishing gear in hand, a satisfied smile on his face. "Good trip?" my mother asked, rising to greet him with a kiss. He nodded, setting down his tackle box. "Great day. Caught a few nice bass, and Daniel's place is coming along nicely." I couldn't help myself. "How is he? Daniel, I mean." My father glanced at me, something unreadable in his expression. "Good. Better than I expected, actually. He seems settled, content even." "That's great," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. "After everything with Sarah." My father nodded, moving to the kitchen for a beer. "Yeah, I was worried about him for a while there, but he's bouncing back. Even talking about maybe buying a place in Riverside, not just renting." The news surprised me. Daniel hadn't mentioned any plans beyond his month-to-month lease. "Really? That's permanent?" "Well, he's got roots here," my father said, returning with his beer. "Friends, his job, no reason to go elsewhere." I nodded, trying to process this new information. Daniel putting down roots in Riverside, 40 minutes from my parents, 4 hours from Chicago. What did it mean for us? My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text. I resisted the urge to check it immediately. "Daniel said to tell you goodbye," my father added, settling into his armchair, "said he's sorry he missed you this weekend." I swallowed hard, nodding. That's nice of him. My father's eyes lingered on me for a moment, as if trying to puzzle something out. Then he turned to my mother, launching into a detailed description of their fishing spots. I excused myself after a few minutes, heading upstairs to check the text in private. It was from Daniel. "All good. Your father doesn't suspect anything. He's happy and I'm doing better after Sarah. Miss you. Call me when you can." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a strange disappointment. My father didn't suspect anything. Our secret was safe. So why did it feel hollow somehow, this successful deception? I waited until later that night, when my parents had gone to bed, to call Daniel. He answered on the first ring, his voice warm in my ear. "Hey," he said softly. "How was your day?" "Good," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Quiet. Yours?" Interesting, he said, a smile in his voice. Your father's still a terrible fisherman, but we had a good time. He said you're thinking of buying a place in Riverside, I said, unable to keep the question out of my voice. You didn't mention that. There was a pause on the line. It's just a thought at this point, Daniel said carefully. But yeah, I've been looking at options. The job's going well, and I like the town. What about... I hesitated, unsure how to frame the question. What about us? Chicago? 4 hours, he reminded me gently. Remember, we'll make it work. But if you're putting down roots in Riverside, Ethan, he cut in, his voice softening. This isn't about avoiding Chicago or you. It's about me finding my place again after Sarah. And right now, that place seems to be Riverside. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I know, I'm sorry, I wish things were simpler. Me too, he sighed. But they're not, and that's okay. We'll figure it out. His certainty calmed me, as it always did. How was it? With my father, I mean. Really. It was... Daniel paused, seeming to search for the right word. Normal and strange, all at once, hiding this part of myself from him, from my oldest friend. It's not easy. The admission made my throat tight. I know. But it's necessary, for now, he continued. Until we figure out what this is, where it's going. The question hung unspoken between us. Where is this going? When will I see you again? I asked instead. I was thinking I could drive up Wednesday, like last week, he suggested. If that works for you. It works, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly, because Daniel chuckled. Eager, are we? He teased. For you? Always, I admitted, feeling bold in the darkness of my childhood bedroom. His voice dropped lower. I miss you, the way you taste, the sounds you make when I touch you. Heat flooded my body at his words. Daniel. Just thinking about Wednesday, he murmured. All the things I want to do with you. We talked for a while longer, voices hushed, words growing increasingly intimate until we were both breathless, separated by miles but connected by desire and something deeper, something neither of us had yet named. After we hung up, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about time again, how it stretched and compressed, how 3 days until Wednesday felt unbearable, how 3 weeks until Chicago felt like both an eternity and an instant. Daniel was buying a house in Riverside, putting down roots, staying, and I was leaving. The contradiction tugged at me, raising questions I wasn't ready to answer. But as I drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Whatever happened next, Daniel Hayes had become essential to me. And somehow, impossibly, I had become essential to him. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Daniel came to the city on Wednesdays. I spent weekends in Riverside. We carved out time together in the spaces between our separate lives, building something that felt increasingly real, increasingly important. My father called occasionally, mentioning fishing trips with Daniel, updates on his house search. If he noticed anything unusual in my responses, he didn't comment. My mother, more perceptive, asked once if everything was truly okay with me. I seemed distracted, she said, like your mind is somewhere else. I assured her I was fine, just focused on the upcoming move. But the guilt of deception weighed on me, especially as things with Daniel deepened into something neither of us could deny was serious. We still hadn't put a name to it, this thing between us. But the night before I was set to leave for Chicago, as we lay in Daniel's bed in Riverside, the question finally surfaced. What are we doing? He asked quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. What is this, Ethan? I propped myself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the dim light. You know what it is. His eyes met mine, serious and intent. I want to hear you say it. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. I'm falling in love with you, I said simply. Maybe have been since that night in the hallway.